Imagine walking through your neighborhood on a cold January afternoon. People are heading home from work. Children are playing nearby. Horses pull wagons through the streets. Everything feels completely normal. Then suddenly, you hear a sound, a deep rumble, like thunder. Except the sky is clear. The noise grows louder. Metal groans, bolts snap. And before anyone can react, an enormous storage tank explodes. Not with fire, not with smoke, but with something far stranger. Molasses. Millions of gallons of molasses. A massive wave surges through the streets. Buildings collapse. People are swept away. Entire sections of the neighborhood are buried beneath a sticky brown flood. It sounds like something from a cartoon, but it really happened, and it became one of the deadliest industrial disasters in American history. This is the story of the Great Molasses Flood of Boston. The year was 1919. World War I had recently ended. America was changing rapidly. Factories were expanding, cities were growing. Industry was booming. In Boston's North End neighborhood stood a massive steel tank owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. The structure towered over nearby buildings. It stood roughly 50 feet tall and held more than 2 million gallons of molasses. For most people, molasses was simply a common ingredient. It was used in baking, cooking, and industrial production. But in enormous quantities, it could also be used to manufacture industrial alcohol. That made it extremely valuable. The company wanted to store as much of it as possible, so they built a giant tank near the waterfront. At first glance, it seemed impressive. But there was a problem. Actually, there were several problems. Almost from the beginning, local residents noticed something wasn't right. The tank leaked. Frequently. Dark brown liquid dripped from seams in the metal. Children sometimes collected the leaking molasses in small containers. People joked about it, but others were concerned. A properly constructed storage tank wasn't supposed to leak. Yet complaints continued. Workers noticed strange noises coming from the structure. Residents reported hearing groaning sounds. Some described the metal as creaking and popping. Instead of addressing the concerns thoroughly, the company took a simpler approach. The tank was reportedly painted brown. The color helped hide the leaks. From a distance, the stains became harder to see. The underlying problem remained. Meanwhile, enormous shipments of molasses continued arriving. The tank grew heavier and heavier. Pressure increased. Winter temperatures added additional stress to the structure. And on January 15th, everything finally went wrong. Shortly after noon, residents heard a tremendous crash. Witnesses later described it as sounding like an explosion. The steel tank suddenly ruptured. Millions of gallons of molasses burst free. The force was unbelievable. A gigantic wave surged through the neighborhood. Some estimates suggest it moved at speeds approaching 35 miles per hour. For anyone in its path, there was almost no time to react. The wall of molasses smashed into nearby buildings. Wooden structures splintered. Foundations collapsed. Railway supports were torn apart. Horses, wagons, and people were thrown through the streets. One of the victims was a man named Isaac Gonzalez. He worked nearby when the disaster struck. Like many others, he had no warning, no chance to escape. The flood overwhelmed everything in its path. Witnesses later described scenes of chaos. People struggled desperately to stay above the thick liquid. Others became trapped beneath debris. Rescuers rushed toward the destruction. But the molasses created an unusual challenge. It wasn't water. It was far thicker, far stickier. Moving through it was incredibly difficult. Victims became trapped. Vehicles got stuck. Even rescue efforts slowed dramatically. As temperatures dropped, conditions became worse. The molasses began thickening. What had already been difficult to move through became even harder. Emergency crews worked through the night, searching for survivors, pulling victims from wreckage, trying to clear pathways through the sticky mess. The scale of destruction shocked the city. Entire buildings had been crushed. Sections of railroad track were damaged. Homes were destroyed. Families were devastated. When the rescue operation finally ended, 21 people had lost their lives. Many more were injured. The disaster became national news. People across the country struggled to believe what had happened. A flood of molasses sounded absurd, but the consequences were horrifyingly real. In the days that followed, investigators began asking questions. Why had the tank failed? Had warning signs been ignored? Could the disaster have been prevented? The answers pointed toward serious problems. Evidence suggested the tank may never have been adequately tested before being placed into service. Engineers later questioned aspects of its construction. Witness reports about leaks and structural concerns gained renewed attention. The more investigators looked, the more troubling the picture became. Residents had noticed problems for years: the leaks, the noises, the visible signs of stress. Yet the tank remained in operation. Eventually, lawsuits followed. Lots of them. Victims' families demanded answers. Businesses sought compensation. The legal battle became one of the largest and most complicated cases of its era. At the time, proving corporate responsibility wasn't always easy. Large companies often had significant advantages in court. But this case was different. Investigators gathered testimony. Engineers analyzed evidence. Witnesses described years of warning signs. The proceedings stretched on for years. When the case was finally resolved, the company was found responsible for the disaster. The outcome was significant. It helped establish stronger expectations for engineering accountability. Companies could no longer assume they would escape responsibility for preventable failures. The lessons extended far beyond Boston. Engineers became increasingly focused on safety standards. Inspections improved. Oversight increased. The disaster became a reminder that infrastructure must be properly designed, tested, and maintained. Because when it isn't, the consequences can be catastrophic. Today, the Great Molasses Flood remains one of the strangest disasters in American history. Not because it involved molasses, but because it revealed something much larger. The danger wasn't the syrup itself. The danger was negligence. The warning signs were there. People noticed them. People reported them. But action came too late. What happened in Boston wasn't simply a bizarre accident. It was a preventable tragedy, one that changed the way engineers, companies, and regulators thought about public safety. More than a century later, the streets have been rebuilt. The tank is gone. The neighborhood has moved on. But the story remains. A reminder that even the most ordinary things can become deadly when corners are cut. And that sometimes the strangest disasters carry the most important lessons. Because on a winter afternoon in 1919, an entire city learned a lesson no one expected. Even a wave of molasses can be deadly.